Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, our mini-STEMposium to support teachers in the field. This is the fourth of 18 webinars we are hosting. This session has 485 people registered. My name is Ken Heydrich, and I am the National STEM Manager for Accelerate Learning. I'll be your host today for an incredible afternoon of learning. I've been in K-16 public education for over 30 years. Connecting with educators in the field like today is the best part of my day. Thank you for being here. We have lined up some exceptional talent from around the country for these mini STEMposiums. This week, we are offering 6 sessions during the afternoon. We also will host 6 sessions during June 16 through 18 and 6 sessions from July 14 through 16. The link to the schedule is found in the chat window. Some of our national superstars include Peter McLaren, Roger Bybee, Oki Lee, Larry Plank, David Crother, Rita McDonald, and Kelly Price Colley. We also have some local trailblazers from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, including Shane Woods and our 2 presenters today, Linda Cook and Malachi Eubank. In addition, we also have some of our best presenters from Accelerate Learning. As you know, these are challenging times. Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes wants to support our hardworking teachers by offering these sessions of high-quality professional learning. Nothing in return. We are just trying to provide some meaningful professional experiences, free. We are trying to take your mind off the pandemic for a moment. Please note that the participation of our major invited speakers does not necessarily mean an endorsement of products developed by Accelerate Learning. We are in challenging times. The speakers, along with me and my colleagues, are here to provide a rich learning experience so that teachers can take back with them some useful information and strategies to their students. We are all in this together. Before we begin, let me share some procedural aspects to this webinar. As you know, we are using Zoom, which has a number of interactive features. Please look at the sound and video controls on the bottom left side. Your sound should be muted. Make sure your audio has a red diagonal line through it. If you choose to display video, please be constantly aware of what you are broadcasting. We also recommend that you use the speaker view on your video display found on the top right corner. Let's try one feature now called polling. Let me release a quick poll to see who we have participating today. So let's take 30 seconds and you will please indicate your background.
Cool.
About 10 more seconds. And bring it to a close in 3, 2, 1. So let's see the results that we have here. All right, it looks as expected. Most of our participants are K-12 teachers, pre-K through 12 teachers, and the majority of them are middle school, 6 through 8. We have 35% being in the middle school level. So thank you again for being here for this webinar. Next, chat. We will be using our chat feature today for comments and questions. This window is being monitored by STEMscope staff, and they will be able to respond when necessary. We will also be using a Zoom function called Breakout Rooms. Our presenter will be able to randomly group people into smaller rooms for discussion. Okay, that's it for the procedures. Today, we are very fortunate to have Linda Cook and Malachi Eubank from the Dallas area. I've known Linda Cook for about 20 years. She is one of the best, hands down ever, education experts that I know of. She's been wonderful to work with. She is the former K-12 Director of Science for 15 years, and she currently was elected the president for Ancela, and her term will begin next June. Secondly, we have Malachi Eubank. I have recently met him. His high energy, he's very thoughtful, he's an amazing educator. He is currently a 5th grade educator in a district in the Dallas area. He was recently named the District Teacher of the Year. He also serves as the District Content Specialist for the district. We are very fortunate to have Linda and Malachi with us today, sharing their expertise and their talents. So Linda and Malachi, take it away.
Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you. It worked.
Perfect. I love it when it works. Hi, I'm Linda Cook, and we are going to talk to you about a 7-year journey that Malachi and I have been on together. And just to sort of give you a little bit of context, as Ken explained, I was the Director of Science for 15 years for the Coppell School District. And when Malachi first came to me, this is what had been going on at the time at the district level. We started a 2-year book study of the K-12 science framework when it was first released. The first year, I had all of my science content specialists do a book study and read the whole framework. And then we decided collectively that the next year we would focus on 4 of the science and engineering practices in particular. And we would look at it through the lens of our K-12 system and whether or not we were meeting expectations and what we could learn from this resource and where we needed to improve. And so at the district level, we focused on asking questions, conducting investigations, analyzing and interpreting data, and obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. We had 4 different cadres of educators from grades K through 12 represented, and each cadre spent a year studying the practice and then reading all different kinds of related research, and then they made recommendations for where we needed to go next. So at this point, as all this was going on at the district level, Mr. Eubank gave me a challenge to work with him one-on-one in his classroom to help him become a better science teacher.
And this is kind of where our story begins. Hello all, I'm Malachi Eubank. This is a little bit of the background, but really to talk to you guys a little bit about what was going on. I had met with Dr. Cook. I had asked Dr. Cook to meet with me simply because I had to have one of those moments, right? Where you look in the mirror. I had to look in the mirror and say, I remember learning science in school, and it was reading a book, answering some questions, but there wasn't a whole lot of doing. And so I found myself teaching that way and knew that it was not good, not only as an educator, but as a scientist in general. And so that's where our story began. I went to Dr. Cook and I said, hey, I need help. And we started our, as she said, we started our journey 7 years ago. And I wanted to connect all of these different things together in my head. And she was my thought partner.
So here's what SWIMAS looks like.
Go ahead.
So Linda, click on the green and you're gonna have to do computer sound. The green share, bottom left.
The green, thank you. No, not that. Sorry. Okay, Ken, sorry about that.
That's okay. Click on the green share screen. And you have options. There should be a little box that says play computer sound.
I've lost it. Sorry about that. Okay, I don't see a green box.
for your share screen?
No, I see a box at the top.
Okay.
I wonder if she's
Here it is.
stopped sharing. Okay.
So try it again.
Try it again, sure.
Okay.
It's a great video to share,
Yeah.
the journey.
Are you able to hear? Can you hear music now?
No, I still
And
can't hear it, Linda.
You
No.
can't hear? Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead and just play it though. Linda, it may be the connection. Maybe it's a weak connection, so the sound
Are you
isn't
able to
coming
see
over.
it?
Yes.
Can you see it, Ken? Okay. It's music in the background. So everyone sing to yourselves. Some lovely music.
I can hear it a little.
There's a little there now.
Getting great chatter about loving what the kids are wearing.
That works.
All right, so I wanted for you guys just to introduce you guys to the SWIMAS model. So that's what it looks like in the classroom every day. And this is what it looks like on paper and as far as a flow chart for us. And these are the phases, phases 1 through 5. We've got pre-assessment, our guided investigation or inquiry, the menu itself, SWIMAS journaling and vocabulary, and then finally the post-assessment. So unlike, it is in effect a model, right? Like you can go in and out of this model, use pieces of it, not a scripted program necessarily, but a model of science inquiry.
So the first stage is pre-assessment. And when we first began, we didn't include this step. And we were way too open-ended, and we had kids write down what they wondered about some really broad topic like matter. And their thinking was all over the place and really great creative ideas that had nothing to do with the standards. And so we did a couple of things that helped rein them in and focus them on what we needed them to think about. And one of those was by using a pre-assessment. Not only did we capture students' prior thinking, but the questions themselves were intentionally designed to help frame student thinking towards what the upcoming exploration might be about.
And here you can see what our biggest goals are, right, is in the state of Texas, at least, we have a curriculum written for us. And so what Dr. Hook and I would do is we would sit together and we would try to bundle as many things as we could so that kids would get this overarching big idea and the overall picture for where we wanted them to go. As Dr. Cook mentioned before, the first iteration of SWIMAS was quite fun. It was somewhat chaotic in that we had all sorts of questions that were not focused on anything related to the topic, but it was fun as a kind of a dartboard. We had to kind of hone them in though.
Yes.
So here are these are just a couple of examples that may be used that I might use. And as you can see here, they're constructed response in nature. And SWIMAS, instead of using the multiple choice or guess, I want to know what they think. And sometimes learners may have no background knowledge. And in that case, I urge them to tell me, like, they don't have any background knowledge, because you will see as we go through the phases, this piece of evidence is very important for their moving forward.
So the next phase is guided inquiry, and this sort of came from the same discussion that we were having as we tried different things and gave each other feedback. We decided that we really needed to ground the students in some kind of experience that they all had in common that would further spur their thinking and their wonder and curiosity.
And I would say this phase, right, because in the traditional classroom, I think growing up, this is where every once in a while our teacher would, okay, here's kind of a lab and walk through this lab. And so there are pieces of that. I would say Dr. Cook and I spend a lot of time coming up with phenomena that we think will be unique to the learners in the class. And so every year is a different discussion. We have some supports that are built in, definitely, but every year is a little bit different in the way that it looks and feels, because not all of my kids have the same background knowledge from year to year, which means we've got to change it up or switch some things out. So, and this is also where the SWIMAS, I use what is known as the SWIMAS leader in our classroom, and SWIMAS leaders are there to help too. And as we're going through these guided inquiries, our number one friend, as we always talk about, is the question. And asking questions leads to greater depth, right? It's how they learn about their natural world. And so the SWIMAS leaders are those people in class that are put in place to help urge the questioning and keep that on the forefront of everything we're doing.
Yeah, so part of our discussion when we're designing the guided inquiry is how do we get kids to wonder about what we need them to wonder about? So we have this deep discussion of the standards before we begin a unit, and we just talk about really what does that mean and where does that lead students in the future? So what they're learning in 5th grade, how will that lead to what they need to know in high school or in middle school? And so what are the kinds of big ideas to which we need them to connect? And so all of that is part of our discussion before we design the pre-assessment and the guided inquiry investigation.
And the next couple of slides here are some of the examples that you can see from the SWIMAS lab. And one of the things too that you can notice, and there's another picture that's coming up, but you can see here too on the far left of your screen, as kids are going through each of these explorations, they are constantly questioning. And one of the things that I ask our SWIMAS leaders to remember is that they're always asking, what do you notice? What do you wonder?
We also post essential questions, and this again ties back to the big ideas, and we want students to be loftier in their thinking and not just focus on the actual items in front of them when they're doing their guided exploration, but think about how those guided explorations might connect to some bigger ideas in science. If we were meeting with all of you individually, we would be giving you some materials right now. This is what we've done with adults in the past when we've shared this presentation, and you would be doing some guided exploration yourselves, addressing the essential questions.
And the essential question, we've talked about this many times as well. The essential question can work also as a piece of assessment. And sometimes that piece of assessment in the form of an essential question will go up right away based on background knowledge, or sometimes I'll wait for a little bit of the unit just to see that they have built a little bit of that construct so that we can move forward.
I know Malachi mentioned when we were talking about the tables, he talked about the SWIMAS leader, and we did have in the chat posted the SWIMAS rubric. And that's what we developed, 4 or 5 years ago. It was an early attempt at a rubric, but part of it was so that students, and that's been posted in your chat pod. Part of the purpose of the rubric was so that students had some sort of language to use in giving each other feedback about where they could improve as questioners, as observers, as thinkers. And it also reflects the kind of language that Mr. Eubank uses when he's giving feedback to his students.
And here is our question board. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see that there are In SWIMAS, we sort after we have come up with all of the questions from a unit through guided inquiry, and learners are writing their questions. They sort them on our main board into Investigable and Researchable. We also have a middle section, which can be both. I encourage learners to try to rewrite questions into the Investigable form as much as possible so that they're doing. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that we have, sometimes we have questions that need to be rewritten to a higher standard from what the SWIMAS leaders believe, or what SWIMAS leaders believe should be a higher standard. And so that's one of our spaces where we put questions to rewrite.
So next phase is the SWIMAS menu, which comes from the questions that are posted on the wall.
So this is the bread and butter of the SWIMAS model, right? This is, and hands down, the most fun part of all of it, in my estimation. And this is what you guys saw in the video, because this is learners pushing themselves based on what they need individually. Mm-hmm. And what the menu really represents just that. It is independent. It can be group if a group of learners has the same question, but learners take their pre-assessments. They go over them. They pick 4 to 5 questions. Hopefully a majority of those are investigable, and create what is known as their SWIMAS menu. And then we have just a very brief conference to make sure that those menus really represent what that learner truly needs. And so I take everything into account. We look at the questions they've chosen. I look through what their guided inquiry looks like. We look at their pre-assessment together, and all those things wrap into what is known as the SWIMAS menu.
So this is where the whole process becomes so personalized and individualized, because as Mr. Eubank mentioned, he has individual conferences with every learner, so that the questions that a learner chooses for the menu is not something that's just something that their friends chose and they think they should choose it too. It's something that they really need based on their own pre-assessment, or something that really meets their interest or areas where they need to grow.
And here's an example of the menu. And again, this comes to me. We have that brief meeting. And when Dr. Cook and I have presented in person, this conference came as kind of it was one of those fail safes too, because one of the things that I noticed was that every single learner in the room had density columns the first time we had done matter. And so I thought to myself, wow, I didn't realize that there was that much of a gap. And come to find out, like, they just all love density columns and they wanted to put them together. And that was great. It wasn't necessarily what they needed. And so that's why the conference became a necessity.
So during this next phase, this is the meat of what's happening. And this may go on for several days, maybe for a few weeks, where students are following their menu and doing their own independent investigations. But where they're recording that information is in their SWIMAS notebook. And they are taking very careful notes that will later be used as evidence to support claims that they make. And we also added some intentional vocabulary work. We don't pre-teach vocabulary. They learn vocabulary experientially, but we added some reinforcement of the vocabulary, because early in the process, maybe about the second year, we found that our English language learners, many of whom are newcomers in Mr. Eubank's class, were not showing the success, as much success as some of the other learners, until we added this intentional vocabulary work, which you'll see.
So one of the things that we stress, right, is just the reliability factor. And for that to happen, we want to make sure that our procedures and the way we talk about science is the same, right? We justify using these words because it's what scientists do and it's how we think. And so I think one of the things that we did intentionally was to make sure that every single learner has these procedures written down and that this is followed every single time. And so here are some artifacts that we wanted to show you guys. And I can't tell you how, for me, amazing this is. And I tell people whenever we talk to groups of people that there is nothing more powerful than a learner's voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these voices advocate for themselves as learners, right? As scientists and as individuals who are curious about what is happening. And it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it, because every time we talk about it, I think of all, again, back to what it was when I was growing up. I handed in a sheet, and I don't think teachers ever knew what I thought about science or how I thought about science.
Malachi, will you tell them what you teach again and give us some,
Yes.
what do you teach? What grade do you teach, Malachi?
Thank you, Jessica.
I'm a 5th grade self-contained educator.
Excellent. And Linda, could
Yes.
you how would this work with younger students? Could you give us a few ideas?
Yeah, we have implemented this in kindergarten classes. So we've implemented this across the gamut. So in our kinder teachers, give a little bit more structure and a little bit more support so that they are helping generate some of those questions. A great kinder teacher to watch, Stacey Harris, is one of our teachers who's been really successful in doing SWIMAS at the kindergarten level. And she gives them, they post questions that are more the whole class works on. And again, because they're not able to write independently, she helps draw those out of them, but then they get to choose which questions, and they do get to work in either small groups or independently. So it's similar. It had to be adjusted a bit for kinder to be appropriate.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Linda.
You're welcome. Thanks for monitoring the chat pod.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
So for vocabulary, we talked about how can we have students really internalize the meanings of these words and not just be using the word because they think they're supposed to, or using the word incorrectly, or using the word and then forgetting it when the next SWIMAS unit came about. And so we decided to implement a strategy that I had learned in a previous training, and it's an interactive word wall. But the way that the students interact really shows their grasp of the understanding of the meaning of the word. Malachi, do you want to say more before we go on to the next slide?
Oh, no, I'll do it through the picture.
Okay.
And so here is our word wall. This is what it looks like for our SWIMAS class. So the words are written on note cards, and then back to the Post-its. We love Post-its and SWIMAS.
Yes.
Learners define those words, and they can define them in any way they see fit, whether they want to write words, draw pictures, just whatever they think is appropriate. And there is no limit to the number of definitions, because I want every learner's voice to be heard in a way that they see fit. And then after they have defined words, they look for connections. And that is represented there by the yarn that goes back and forth across the picture. And so you can see, for example, the far left side has yarn that connects it to the far right side. And so the far left might be physical science and then life science. And you can see on the note cards in the middle that are pasted over the yarn, those are the actual connections. That's them verbalizing the connection that they saw between two different concepts. And so once all of this is complete, we can see that no one term lives in isolation, or no science lives in its own realm, right? It's all connected. And this is another thing that blows us away, right? Because they find connections that we would not have directed them toward necessarily, but they've taught us.
And so that leads us to the post-assessment, which is, as Mr. Eubanks said earlier, definitely not a multiple choice assessment. Usually it is, it can vary. It can be a hands-on form of assessment. It can be giving them back their pre-assessment and having them write in a different color, how their thinking has changed. It can be a different form of assessment than their pre-assessment. So we've used all different kinds of varieties.
Linda? I have a
Yes,
question from the chat. Is there a
absolutely.
way to do a virtual word wall? Have you used any techniques or programs to do that?
That's a great question. We'll be talking about all of the digital tools that we used during COVID-19, when all of a sudden we had to take the model to at-home learning. And for the vocabulary word wall, I've not seen that, but I don't know why you couldn't use something like Padlet, something like that for posting sticky notes and making connections. I'm thinking of even concept mapping software, where you can make the links between terms and then you label on the link how they're connected.
Very good, thank you. You've had a couple of ideas in the chat window too.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and so when we get to post-assessment, I think the number one, at least when we first started talking about post-assessments in general, I think my number one issue with post-assessments had always been the finality of it, right? The idea that once you give a test, you're done. And so we use post-assessment really as another growth opportunity. And yes, it is at the end of the unit, but it simply is another benchmark, right? Just like any assessment, we're trying to constantly get better and build this knowledge and do what it is we said we wanted to do at the beginning even better. And so, you know, with some of the pre-assessment questions that I might use, we'll also use the true application where we go into the lab. And then one of my personal philosophies is the idea that grading looks different for children. I don't put numbers on papers. I comment about scientific thinking. I try not to steer anyone towards those general statements of great job or you're really good, because I don't know that they grow as scientists based on the general idea that they did a good job, because I don't know that they know what they did well. And so I'm very careful to put specific commentary on what I think, you know, is very strong. And then we don't say that we're wrong in 5D. We simply say that we need to fix our thinking. That's how we do it. And so here you can see an example of a pre-assessment that was given. And you can see on the right side where it says NBK, that's a learner telling me that they had no background knowledge when we first started. And then they wrote in regular pencil after the first time, and then different colors represent how they continue to change. And so you could, for example, you could do the same thing on multiple choice as well. You would just have them explain and justify the evidence that was given, either correct or not correct. I choose to do it this way, where it's open. And so they're telling me each time they're communicating. It's our communication, or it's one way to bridge that communication gap of I want to tell him what I know instead of A, B, C, D.
Sometimes the post-assessments are hands-on, as you can see here. And we had commented when we saw these photos about the different looks on the learners' faces. The boy on the left is so serious and concentrating to get the light bulb to light up. And then the little girl just has this look of joy because she's so excited about what she's learning.
And so those are the 5 phases, from pre-assessment through to guided inquiry, the menu, the journaling that takes place, and finally the post-assessment. And again, this is, because it is a model, we like to talk about the fact that it's organic, it's changing, it's always changing. And we had a conversation, I don't remember if it was last week or late last week, where we're even thinking about changing pieces of this as we move forward in the near future, simply because it makes sense to. And so we want to reiterate that, like any model, it's always moving from A to B. And sometimes we take different pieces of it and either reconstruct it or small fixes.
And I do want to communicate that this is how Malachi teaches science all the time. It's not just for a couple of units during the year. This is it. They have SWIMAS time instead of science time. And they have a SWIMAS journal instead of a science journal. And they're all in all the time. In the chat pod, you should see a link now to just a shorter practitioner's article that we published in the Science Teachers Association of Texas journal a few years ago. That's just an overview if that's something that you want to go back and refer to later. So that link is in your chat pod.
Okay, just one moment. Can
Oh,
I ask
sure.
a couple of questions?
Yeah.
How would you say that this works with a particular set of performance expectations?
So we are in Texas, and so we have different standards than the NGSS. Sadly, our state didn't adopt the NGSS yet. But with any kind of standards, you would still go through the same process. You would think about what is the content that you want to learn, and how they learn that content is through the doing of science. We refer to the performance expectations of the NGSS because I love the way that they're written, because they already are three-dimensional. And so, but you could certainly guide the explorations. Some of the things that they do at the beginning could be directly related to the practices that were included in that performance expectation.
Oh, good. Thank you for that answer.
Sure.
And then, in addition to that, do you, even though you're working in TEKS or with the Texas standards,
Yeah.
are the students' questions curated to stay within a specific topic or a phenomena?
So we guide the guided exploration, and the pre-assessment sort of guides their thinking. Mr. Eubank, can you talk about what Mr. Upchurch calls the crazy questions? If you get a question that's sort of way off base, that is beyond the realm of what you think that the expectations are for your students, how do you handle that in your classroom?
Yes, ma'am. That's a great question, right?
Yeah, we've had those conversations before.
Yeah, one of the things that is important is, as you said, to keep those questions in the realm of what it is that we want them to be curious about.
Yes.
And so when some of the times we have to stop, it could be a group of children, it could be a whole class, but that's where our SWIMAS leaders and reteach, and because the curation of our questions are all up front for everyone to see, that's where we can use those as models as well. And so to rewrite, and then we spend a lot of the first part of the year learning how to question and how to rewrite. And as we call them, either the crazy questions or the Google questions, we spend a lot of time focusing our attention and our energy on, how can we ask this so that we move ourselves to a different place, right? Versus just the inherent knowledge piece of it. How do we ask the question, or how do we change the question so that we move to the doing of what we're looking for?
Another way to think about it too is if there's a question that's just beyond the realm of what's appropriate for fifth grade, and if you feel like if a student were to go on that tangent, they would end up being distracted from what it is that they need to learn within that unit, we honor the student's question and we value their questioning and compliment them for that. One of our teachers has a wall that he calls the crazy question wall, and he posts questions there that fall into that category. They're not quite relevant to the unit, but they're still valid questions. And then if there are times during the year where maybe you finished a unit and there's a couple of days before a holiday, then you might go back as a class and see if any of those questions at that time would be worth pursuing. So you do sort of channel and guide what questions they choose, but that goes back to the conferencing that's done when students are selecting their menu questions.
Yes, definitely.
Excellent.
One thing sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go, Linda. I was just wanting to back up a minute. And which link were you wanting shared next?
On slide 28, it was the Stages of SWIMAS article from Satellite, and the article is on pages 8 and 9. It'll link you to the journal.
Perfect. We have that. Thank you.
Thank
so it's
you.
coming to your chat soon. Thank you
sorry?
so much. Thank you so much for that information.
Oh, sure.
And we place that link in the chat for you.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. So one thing that is just amazing when you walk into Mr. Eubank's room is the classroom culture. And he sets that culture and those expectations at the very beginning of the year, in that he has high expectations for everyone. And it's really a culture of doing science and not being passive and sitting back and waiting for the teacher to tell you the answer. And so all of that helps support the SWIMAS model. Mr. Eubank, what else would you like to say about culture in your classroom?
Oh, yes, ma'am. And so I think as we all strive for some of those common goals of, you know, high expectations and safety and, you know, making sure that it's fun and all of those different norms and mores that we would have or that we would set forth for our learners. I think the last bullet on this slide, right, really says it. And I tell people all the time, we believe, right, because I believe in them. And this goes back to, it could be any learner. It could be a learner who speaks very little English, but I know that those learners can do it, and they do. And there's never a question of, you know, the labels that we have for ourselves or the labels that they put on themselves. I know. I tell them from the very beginning when we do our goggles ceremony, I know that they can, and they do. And I think of all the things in that room that are magical, it's to watch them take that autonomy and take that ownership and tell themselves, I know I can, right? Like I might need a little help and I might fail the first time, but at the end of the day, I can because I believe in me. And it only happens because of that.
It's also a culture where the learning of every child is valued and appreciated and supported by all other learners in the classroom. So it's not competitive. Everyone is learning something different because of their choice, perhaps, but they are all learning in parallel and they support each other. So some days you're in there and there's several different investigations going on and something great will happen at one person's table and they'll call the rest of the group over to come and see, hey, come and look at this. Isn't this so cool? And you'll hear support from all the other learners about, wow, that's so great. That's so interesting. Look at what I'm learning. And it's just such a great, refreshing and exciting classroom to be in.
And the other part about that culture too, that I think is so important is that energy where, you know, it could be one person, it could be a group of learners are excited and they invite others in our class to come over. And then it just spawns more questions about what's going on, which inevitably is why open inquiry has been such a positive experience in the room, because there is never an end to the questions, whether they're on their SWIMAS menu or they're looking at evidence. They keep putting questions up for the entire unit. So we never run out of questions.
So SWIMAS was up and running and the classroom's going great. In fact, Mr. Eubank and I were about to present at NSTA. And then all of a sudden the whole world changed because of COVID-19. And so we quickly had some behind the scenes communication about, wow, you know, how's this going to work in stay at home, use your devices situation. And it was a really smooth transition, I think in large part because he'd already built that culture. And so the expectation of the parents as well as the students was, we're doing science. This is what we do. We don't sit back and learn about it. We are actively engaged in the doing of science. And so Mr. Eubank wrote a blog to explain a bit about what that looks like in the digital realm. So the first part is just an overview of what we just shared with you. And now I've highlighted in green some of the things that we changed or that he changed during COVID-19. So
Thank
Mr.
you
Eubank?
for providing that blog.
Sure.
We did have a mention of or an ask if you had a book. So thank you for providing.
Oh, actually, that's in the works, right, Mr. Eubank? Someday.
we talk about the book.
Yes. We actually have published 2 articles. One was the quick practitioners one that we shared with you in the link. We also have a more research-based article, and that's listed in our list of presentations and publications at the end of our presentation, which we're happy to share. But in the works, someday, Mr. Eubank is going to write a book about SWIMAS. All right, so do you want to talk about the changes that you made?
Yeah, so the first part, so the first thing we did when we moved to the digital realm was I had to think about what was going to change, right? What about SWIMAS was going to change? Pre-assessment, it wasn't going to change. I was still going to pre-assess. We just had to do everything digitally. And so one of the things that we wanted to highlight was how this looks what this looks like and how this works in the digital world, and some of the tools that we use to get there. And so, Dr. Kirk, do we have those?
Are you able to see? I'm getting a strange message. Are you able to see the blog post on your screen? Mr. Eubank?
And it looks, we see the SWIMAS blog in teal blue, but it didn't pull up.
Okay.
Blog is not up.
I don't know if your screen froze.
I'm getting a yellow message that sharing is paused. So let me try that. Let me try to resume share. Can you see it now?
It's still the slide, not the blog.
Okay.
It'll pop up in a new tab. Is it on your
It
Safari?
does it on my screen, and now I'm trying to resume share.
So go to share screen, the green suitcase, and you should have different options.
All I see is resume share.
Go ahead and do that then.
I tried. Okay. We can talk through it.
Yeah, that's okay. We can talk through it.
All right.
And so, yeah, in this blog, basically, I was just, I don't know, I was kind of reflecting on what I wanted learners to do or to be able to do as scientists, even though they couldn't be in school. And so SWIMAS in the digital world. So just to start with, one of the things that didn't change was the phases, right? The phases of the model were the same. And so again, if we just through the 5 phases, the first pre-assessment, I gave all digitally, gave feedback digitally. We have, in our school district, we used a platform called Schoology, and everything, all of our workflow was through Schoology. And so I was able to build pre-assessments digitally through that platform. And so not a lot changed through that. Dr. Hook, did you want to add anything about pre-assessment?
No, I was thinking about the guided investigations. Mm-hmm. And because normally in the guided investigations, you have the kids right there in the classroom and you can guide the materials that you give them to do the hands-on. That was a bit of a challenge in the COVID-19 environment, in that you had to do films of yourself out exploring nature. And then you encourage the students to make their own films that they shared with you through Flipgrid. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
It
was my very own opportunity to be like the Steve Irwin Bear Grylls. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time at the Coppell Nature Park, Heritage Park, and really just spending time, because we had moved to life science. And so, the first topic was living and non-living. And so I had this idea, well, I can't do this and I can't pull these kids into our school garden or into our schoolyard. And so I took them on a virtual field trip, and then I had them do something similar and post it.
And then the sticky notes were done through Padlet. And by the way, the people who are monitoring the chat, you should have added the link to the blog there, so you guys can pull it up there. And then also we added a link to Flipgrid for you to add to the chat if you want to learn more about Flipgrid. And then we actually have a link of the Padlet that's from Mr. Eubank's class. And you can see, because students don't post their real name, they post their nicknames, which is what they go by in class. We're not breaking confidentiality, if you can see what their questions are on the Padlet. And
Linda,
then
do you want me to, I'm sorry, Linda, do you want me to show what the blog looks like on my screen?
yes.
I pulled it up.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, if you can
Okay,
share
so
your screen. Thank
so
you.
if
I don't
you'll
know why it
stop,
wouldn't work from mine.
if
Yeah.
you'll stop sharing,
Okay.
let me pull it up right here.
Thank you.
Okay, there you go. You all see that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the Padlet with all of their questions posted.
Nice. Okay.
And then,
stop.
Mel, do you want to talk about the keynote that maybe Kim can pull that up as well from the blog?
Yeah, do you have a full blog up?
What would you like me to do here?
Can you go back to the blog right there?
One to
Is it
the
showing?
left. At the top of your screen, go to the SWIMAS blog.
Oh, no, it didn't go.
One of your windows says SWIMAS blog up at the top.
Yeah, right there.
Oh, that's why I was trying to find it. Search for it.
Gotcha.
That's okay. I'll just talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of our workarounds for the menu, which is normally in their journal, was to build. So I built a keynote that would have certain pieces in place where they could just move their digital stickies into a space that I had created for them, and then that way, their evidence collection of data that moves towards evidence and claims, all of those things were still there. It was just in the digital format. And so I think one of the great things about all this was that it turned out that, again, with the validity and reliability, all of the learners would be able to show their independent learning, but we all use the same vehicle, and that was Keynote in this case. So again, it wasn't any one piece of technology that was going to make this thing happen. I piecemealed a bunch of different things so that the model would, again, seem as familiar to them at home as it was in the classroom, because at the end of the day, that's what I wanted for them the most. And for parents, I think that was the important piece too, was that, this is the model we've used all year. There is no reason we can't still do science the way we're accustomed to doing science.
I loved what you shared with me also about learning about the individual student families, because you had at-home learning and students were sharing from home about their experiences. You learned about different cultures and customs and families, and that kind of broadened your classroom as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found, right, is the idea that different cultures communicate differently, and that's something in my schema that had been developed as an educator, especially with the numerous ethnicities and cultures that are presented in any one year. Some of the communication, though, it was interesting for me because I had to learn, little subtleties that I had not noticed just with our learners, because families came to me through video, right, and shared some of their homes and shared some of their lives. And I don't take that for granted. I don't take that lightly, because it's important. And I had mentioned to Dr. Cook that was a layer of SWIMAS that I was not expecting, but was pleasantly surprised.
Malachi, what percentage of your students participated in digital learning?
I'm sorry?
How many students did you have participating in digital learning?
I had 25, so 100% of my learners participated.
We are a district or I'm not in the district anymore, but the district where Malachi teaches is K through 12, actually pre-K through 12, one-to-one computing. And so they have iPads at 5th grade, every student does. And so that helped with the transition, because every student in his classroom had a device. So we are going to do a quick break, just 5 minutes to breakout rooms, just to give you time to talk and verbalize a little bit about what you might be thinking. Within your breakout room, I want you to think about what questions or concerns you might have, and then also what parts of the model you feel most comfortable implementing, and then we'll come back together. And after we come back together, you can add to the chat anything that your group wanted to share, but don't add it till we come back, because we won't be able to see it if you add it while you're in the breakout.
All right, Linda, I'll be able to do the breakout rooms for you. We'll have about 5 participants in 35 rooms. Will that work?
Okay, perfect.
Okay. I hope all of you will go to a breakout room. This is a very great technique to increase the discussion. And Linda, how long would you like them in the rooms?
5 minutes, and then we're going to come back to close.
5 minutes, come back, and then they will share in the chat. Okay. Please go to your rooms for this activity.
Go to your room.
Oh, it shows them all going to the rooms.
Linda and Malachi, you should be able
Yes.
to go join rooms.
Okay.
If you look at that, you can join, pick a breakout room and go join and hear what's going on.
I'm not able to see that. How do I join?
Click, do you have breakout room on your Zoom bar?
On my Zoom bar? Okay, let me check. I have to get out of full screen to see it, I think. I don't see breakout rooms. Oh, maybe under the more.
Yeah, try more.
Oh yeah, now I do. So that'll just put me in a room.
Does it show like join? Are you allowed to join?
It just says breakout rooms.
Okay,
Can I click it?
You can't.
Oh, okay, that's all right.
But if you want to join, I'll go to one.
Oh. Yeah, just wait because we're close to time. I was responding to some of the questions in the chat.
Good. You should be getting close. Do you want me to do a 30-second
Yeah,
warning?
thank you.
So we are back.
Hey, welcome back.
Thank you. So we had a couple of questions in our group when you guys are ready to talk about that.
Sure. Why don't you can go ahead and ask, and then we're going to go through just a little bit of wrap up, and then we have another slide for more questions.
Okay, sure. So one of the questions that we had before was talking about, vocabulary and doing it in
Yes.
multiple classrooms. And so would you do those graphic organizers with that, or let me ask you this question specifically, the way she said it. It says, how would you use the interactive vocab with multiple class periods?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because Malachi is self-contained, right? He has science one time a day. And so he was able to use the wall outside of his classroom. All of those windows are in the hallway. And so the words are posted on the hallway. I've seen some teachers post some words on different cabinets. I've also seen some post words on the ceiling and then have the yarn that looks like a big spider web on the ceiling. And so you would kind of think about either different regions in your room, or you could make it be whole grade level. And for example, I taught middle school for years, and so I could have a word wall and then different classes would add to it, so that you just have this really convoluted spider web. They're all using the same words perhaps, but the connections can cross from different classes to different words. So anyway, it would just be a lot more yarn, but it could still work by combining all the classes.
And, we also talked about, there was another question that's a lot of questions popping up in the chat, but we talked someone mentioned, SWIMAS on a budget. And then another person in the chat asked, did your school pay for Padlet for all the kids? Or is that a free program that you're using?
Malachi, can you address Padlet and whether that was provided by the school? Is he back on?
Yeah, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Now I can, yes.
Okay. So for Padlet, it is a pay to play, as you will now, but you do get, I think it's 3 or 5 Padlets for free. And so I think as most educators, you use those 5 and you just keep reusing and recycling. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, for every, I think, especially since COVID-19, and Padlet has gone to some of the subscription and pay for this, but you still get those 3 or 5 for free, which means you can still utilize those and you could pull stickies off and replace, or you could, every other pad, you could do new pad, then change the one before.
Okay. But yeah, true. And all districts are across the country now are thinking about how can we provide more supports for digital learning, because regardless of what happens with the start of school next year, we might need to be prepared to close again if the virus breaks out again. And so I think across the country, these conversations are happening about what digital tools do we need to provide so that everyone has access to those. And about the hands-on materials, there are a lot of things we did. We had a kit-based science program, and we gave the kits to campuses. And so Mr. Eubank and several other teachers decided to do this as well. They took their kits apart and just put all the materials in the classroom for kids to access. And Mr. Eubank took the fronts off of all of his cabinets so that there's no doors. And so kids can easily see the materials that are there and can access what they need. At middle school, also, when I had kids doing independent investigations, I would encourage them, I would tell them, these are the materials that I have in the classroom that you're welcome to use. If you have an investigation that you want to do that uses additional materials, you'll need to bring them from home. And of course, we had to make sure that they were all safe materials, and they knew what safety protocols we followed. But sometimes that helped with the finances of not having everything that they needed.
And I'm also not afraid of free.
Yeah.
Any websites that say, hey, this is free, we'll send you samples. Even one sample can last for the whole class. So I do free.
Yes, yes, and we definitely have limited time. And I liked how you said, you know, we have a lot of teachers who are in our chat today, or administrators that have a
Oh, good.
wealth of knowledge, and they're just sharing away in the chat. So
Awesome.
make sure that you guys share those things in the chat as well.
Awesome. I read a bunch of the chats when you guys were in the breakout session. Great conversations.
Yeah.
So a little bit more just about the end of our story is, it's not the end, it's always ongoing. But the first year or two, we really wanted to get the kinks out of the model and think about what works best before we were ready to start sharing. But since then, we've done a lot of sharing. We shared with teachers across the district several times in district professional learning. We shared at state conferences. We've published 2 articles. We've presented at national conferences, both the Learning Forward and NSTA. And then we also, within our curriculum, have embedded supports for the SWIMAS model, so that in our curriculum in the district, teachers had the choice of doing more of a guided inquiry approach, or they could do the SWIMAS model that was more open inquiry. And so we have those supports as well. And then we're always talking about our next steps. We shared with you earlier the 1.0 version of the rubric. We're still working on a 2.0 version of the rubric that will take into account some of the national support for 3-dimensional learning and cross-cutting concepts. If you are, Jessica, monitoring the chat, could you post the link to the EQUIP rubric? I was in a training at Incella and learned about the EQUIP rubric maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And it was a summer leadership institute, and I kept sending messages to Malachi saying, oh my gosh, this is so helpful. This is really going to help us take SWIMAS to the next level. And of course he thought I was crazy, but later when he learned more about it, he decided, oh, that is a great tool. And so that's one of the ways that we reflect on the depth of thinking of our learners. And as we develop our next iteration of the rubric, we will use the EQUIP rubric as a guide, as well as the matrix for cross-cutting concepts, to help increase student thinking more. And Mr. Eubank, anything else that you want to add?
Well, I was just going to say, just like we talk about the background knowledge of learners in the classroom, yeah, Dr. Cook kept sending me messages about this 3-dimensional learning. You got to use this, you got to use that. And again, looking in the mirror, I had to just be vulnerable with her and say, listen, that sounds great. I don't know what you're talking about, but it's really good. And then at NSCA, I spent a few sessions going to learn about 3 dimensions. It finally was that light bulb, because I was like, oh, now I see where we're moving. Yeah. Because before then, I would just assume that she was leading me in the right direction, and she would always be smiling and saying, this is so great. And I would smile too and be like, yes, I have no idea what she's talking about.
So are there a few additional questions? I know one that I saw in the chat that I was reviewing. Malachi, they wanted to learn about your goggle ceremony.
Oh, the goggle ceremony. So
to honor safety.
Yes. So we talk, the first week is all about safety and what safety feels like, looks like, sounds like. And so we go into the SWIMAS lab and we talk about, we don't really talk about procedures as much as we just talk about the feeling of the room. And so a couple of days later, we kind of get into a couple of observational activities, and then we talk about tools and all the different safety procedures that need to go around that. And so at the end of the first week, when I am sure that they're ready to be SWIMAS, we have a goggle ceremony, and where I hand them their pair of goggles for the year. And that means they are officially inducted into the SWIMAS classroom. And it's, they're clapping, they're cheering each other on. It's a lot of fun.
Yay. And Jessica, are there other just 1 or 2 questions that you see popping up a lot? I know we're about to run out of time.
About special ed, could you talk a little bit about how you scaffold for
Awesome.
special ed students?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I have done would be to, so let's just go back to the first part, looking at pre-assessment. Again, all of those accommodations, that have to take place, right, take place. And so it could be a conversation. There are ways that we communicate that might be different than the traditional pencil and paper or even the doing. And so then after we get through those, the scaffolding comes from me helping with questioning and, even cueing them. And so we'll write the questions together. What might that look like? What is it that you want to know? And then their menu may be modified too, so that we're looking at, I want you to fully understand, these two concepts. And so we're going to break these two questions, or break this one question into two pieces and look at it in different ways. And so just like for ELLs, just like for special ed students, just like for any special population with a label, right? Mm-hmm. I scaffold from the beginning to the end so that it is as customized to them as it can be, while still under the same umbrella of we all have to know this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
So here's our contact information, and I want to encourage you to follow, especially Mr. Eubank, on Twitter, because you'll see lots of examples of SWIMAS in action, because he's constantly posting pictures of what the kids are doing. Sometimes the kids will post questions to me, and I'll send a question back on Twitter, so that's a fun place to follow us, or of course you're welcome to email us. And I'm so sorry that we don't have time for a lot more questions, but I can go back and you can always reach out to us on email or through Twitter if we weren't able to answer your individual questions. And then we're going to let Ken wrap up the presentation session. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda and Malachi. That was wonderful. You shared a lot of relevant insights of how to engage students in meaningful lessons. The development of your model is outstanding. It was fun to follow the different steps that you've taken. You can keep up with Linda at the National Science Education Leadership Association in SELA, and Malachi with the Capel School District in Texas. To follow up, we will now post a certificate of participation in the chat window. So if you will look at the chat window, you will see a PDF document show up. You must double click on the PDF document so it will download onto your desktop. Again, look for the PDF window in the chat and double click it, and you will be able to download your own certificate from this session. We will also now start a short 5-question survey about this webinar. This webinar has been recorded and it will be available on the mini-STEMposium.com website in the next day or two. Again, the video will be posted on the mini-STEMposium.com website in the next day or two. A follow-up email will come from me and it will have a link to the handout from today. So you will get an email from me thanking you for your participation, and it will have a link to the handout from this presentation. Please remember that we have additional webinars this week. We have a set of 6 sessions in June and 6 sessions in July. You are welcome to go online and register for those also. On behalf of Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes, we appreciate you taking time to participate in these learning experiences. Thank you, and be safe.